So I have reservations about calling it the family charter.
Family charter, okay.
I don't like women's charter either, but family charter is obviously a bit touchy because we have seen over the past few months the word family has been co-opted into a very narrow definition. I also want to address the point on the bias that you were speaking about. So CEDAW, right, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, in 2011, the Singapore cycle, the committee actually told the Singapore government to enact legislations to prevent discrimination against lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender people. But even though this recommendation was written into the report, it was eventually not taken up by the Singapore government, and then we had a lot more problems down the road. So I just wanted to also point out on that note, I might be jumping around a little bit, that, you know, stuff like family violence, stuff like intimate partner violence, stuff like, your partner not doing anything, sitting at home on their bums, or not caring enough for the family, these are also issues faced by the lesbian and gay communities, as well as the transgender community who have not undergone the sex reassignment surgery because they're still considered gay under the law. So that one clause in the Women's Charter that delegitimizes same-sex marriages actually reduces our access to the personal protection order with all its flaws and all its contentions, the maintenance provisions with all its flaws as well. So I just want to point out that even though it started out as something to protect people, right? Protect women and girls, as in it only protects certain types of people. That's the point I would like to make for comments and discussion.
Interesting point. Lawyers.
I think if you're talking about violence between partners, certainly the Women's Charter would not apply. The provisions of the Women's Charter would not apply to partners, right? But you have an alternative legislation, right, which you can file a complaint, a magistrate's complaint in the criminal courts, right, and use the penal code as a remedy to try and redress the wrong. If you're talking about maintenance, that's certainly a huge challenge, because I don't think there's any other legislation, right? We should then allow partners to go and claim maintenance from each other. But if, for example, partners buy a property, for example, and they have joint names and they contribute towards the property and the relationship breaks down, certainly in how do you then divide that particular asset, right? The Women's Charter would not apply, but you could apply, for example, property law, right, in terms of whether there's a trust involved. You still look at contributions, but under property law, not under the Women's Charter. So it's not the divorce component, but it's still the law still recognizes that you may have contributed, right, and look at that and divide that particular property if there's a dispute as to ownership or as to share the proceeds of sale eventually.
But if I could maybe look at it slightly differently. It's a women's charter that's supposed to protect women who are in danger as well. But it is restricted to marital relationships.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, so when in Vanessa's case, you know, if you have an intimate partner, right, and there is abuse in that relationship, it's an abuse outside of marriage, because it's not technically marriage. She is not entitled to the PPO.
Yes, she's not.
So, in that case, how does the Women's Charter protect this woman?
Does not.
At this point in time, it does not.
So it is discriminating. The Women's Charter is actually discriminating against a woman because she is with another woman.
The Women's Charter is supposed to protect the relationship of a husband and a wife.
No, but it's
And
also
under
is supposed to.
according to the law, a husband and a wife is a male husband and a female wife.
No, but it's also supposed to protect the rights of women and girls, right? That's another part of it. She's a woman, and you're having a relationship with another woman, which means there are two women here who may need protection, and the Women's Charter fails to do that. What's the reason for that?
question.
No answer. Because, well, it does
It's
not
because
provide
it's
any
because
recognition
of
of the religion.
it's because there's something else above the charter that dictates how the charter is to be understood
interpreted.
and interpreted and employed.
And
That's the whole point that we have been talking about earlier on, right? It is not the text, it is the way the text is read and put into action. And that is predicated on values that society or the people who are in a position of authority in society decide on. So there is a bias.
there is a bias.
There is a bias. And I think that is the point that arises from this. Yes?
So I would like to compliment Vanessa's point on this. I completely concur with you on everything on this. Perhaps there should be a way in which legally we can broaden the definition of family, the notion of family. Go basically transcend the traditional conceptualizations of family, like having a man and a woman being in a married relationship and having children. Go beyond that. Some families do not have a marriage involved. They may not necessarily be a man or a woman being the main partners. There could be a lesbian or a homosexual couple or a transvestite couple and other combinations being involved in
But
their family. And they may have children too.
In that case, I mean, there are legislative issues, right? That's not the way family is defined in Singapore, right? Kim Young?
I mean, it doesn't fall within the traditional definition
No, of course
family.
not.
So
Or
the
even
question,
the legal
yeah.
definition.
So the question is it time to relook,
Broaden
right?
the definition.
The definition of what is acceptable through societal norms, and it's a question of whether society as a whole is progressive enough as a society to be inclusive. I mean, in some countries it has been; they have accepted. I mean, even in nearby countries to Singapore, right? So the question is whether or not, as a society, Singapore is ready to broaden that definition. And certainly, I suppose when that time comes, when we do not know, right? But if there's a movement, there's enough, for want of a better word, groundswell, right? That time may come sooner rather than later, right? But I don't think, if you ask me personally, that is it's a closed discussion. I think it is an open discussion. And certainly if we keep that discussion open, then things will progress. It's just that how we have progressed, right, over the last 50 years, right? Not by keeping quiet, but by having discussion.